we could do that.
So that's actually an interesting thing. When the pandemic started, there were stories that came out about engineers working from home. Engineers started getting two jobs and doing both at the same time because they just weren't working half of the day. So they were
realized they
collecting.
had a lot of downtime.
Yeah, that actually became a fairly prevalent thing, and like companies started actually like checking in on their employees to see if they were working another job.
I don't see why that's a problem though, because if you've already done all that you can do and you're waiting on like approvals or something and you have time.
Yeah.
And you're salaried, it's not like you're wasting the company's money, but you also can't do anything else that relates to your work until you have approval to move on.
Right.
Especially in jobs like that. So
and I always wondered how that worked. Like if you have meeting overlaps, like do you just have to come up with an excuse for why you can't attend one of your meetings?
Probably.
Or maybe they work in like different time zones, so like one job's hours are slightly shifted, so they can make it work a little bit more.
I'm sure there's a way to coordinate it. Obviously there is, because a lot of people do that and are doing that. Hey, speaking of remote jobs.
What?
I have a story from the Post Millennial.
Okay, well let's go into it. Let's Take Your Medicine, episode number 25. So what is the story?
It's the Mexicans want immigrant Americans to go home.
Oh boy.
I know.
All right.
That's the wrong one.
All right, we're going. So talk about the story.
So this is from the Post Millennial, and I called it "White Liberals Destroy Culture Again." And there's a lot of Southern Californians moving to Mexico City right now, and the natives and locals are not happy about it. And somebody put up in public, "New to the city, working remotely? You're a fucking plague and the locals fucking hate you. Leave."
Based Mexicans.
They do not like American immigrants. Do not like them at all. And I don't blame them. So this article starts, "In recent months, journalists have begun covering the phenomenon of United States residents leaving their home country for Mexico. Kate Linthicum, I think is how you say her name, published a piece on Wednesday in the LA Times documenting the mass migration and the impact it has on locals, who she says wants them gone. Linthicum reports that American citizens, quote, have flooded the nation's capital and left a scent of new wave imperialism, citing inflation accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic as a likely cause. And this is her tweet about it. Mexico City, there's a lot of white people in this picture. As you can see, Mexico City is being flooded by Americans, including legions of remote workers drawn by cheaper rents. They're transforming classic neighborhoods, the housing market, and even racial dynamics. More and more locals are asking them to please go home or just bluntly leave.
Yeah.
Locals aren't taking kindly to the recent influx of American citizens who have begun hanging posters around town to encourage them to leave. And it's the "New to the city, working remotely. You're a fucking plague and the locals fucking hate you. Leave." In response to one tweet that read, quote, "Do yourself a favor and remote work in Mexico City. It is truly magical." The poster was met with a similar sentiment across the board. Please don't. This city is becoming more and more expensive every day, in part because of people like you, and you don't even realize or care about it, one comment read. Some Americans are taking advantage of their, quote, oppressed status as a minority group. Lauren Rodwell, 40, a marketer who works remotely, moved to Mexico from San Francisco in January. Rodwell, who was Black, said she doesn't feel guilty about gentrification. Quote, "I kind of feel like as a person of color from America, I'm so economically disadvantaged that wherever I go and experience some advantage or equity, I take it." So the woman who's working a marketing job remotely and is from San Francisco is economically disadvantaged.
Yeah.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah. Wow. And then
moved to a cheap ass city.
Yeah.
And is still economically full of people of color and who are actually economically disadvantaged.
It's so revealing. Like they don't care. They're not principled. They only care about their power and their status. They'll happily trample over somebody else's quality of life if it means they get to take an advantage.
Well, and this is how you know that the whole victimhood status thing is just bullshit and a power grab. and they know that they're not actually victims and that they actually hold a great deal of power, because she can claim that she's economically disadvantaged when she's probably making multiple six figures, like probably $400,000 a year for whatever company she's working for as a marketer.
Could be that high, yeah.
If she's from San Francisco, probably, because they have to account for cost of living.
That's true.
And if she moved to Mexico City, where it's way cheaper, she's probably making hand over fist. And she still thinks that she is oppressed and economically disadvantaged just because she's black.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know if she actually believes that genuinely, but she's going to keep saying it and using it to her advantage.
Yeah.
Also, Mexicans don't give a shit about your, quote, oppression in the eyes of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
They don't care.
Right.
They come to America and they don't give a shit about your oppression here.
Right.
So they're not going to give a shit about your oppression in their native country.
If anything, they have more woke points because Mexico was the seat of a lot of indigenous empires.
Yes.
Aztec, Mayans.
Yeah.
Or was it Mayan? No, Mayans were South America, I think.
Yes.
But Aztecs,
Central South America.
those
Yeah.
other Mexican tribes, there was a couple more that I don't remember the name of. But they
Yeah.
had empires, and then Cortez came on over and wiped them all out, which probably was a good thing because it was freaking horrendous,
Barbaric and primitive.
Yeah.
And I
But
mean,
they-
not to say that the Spanish conquistadors weren't barbaric and primitive, but they did have technologies that the native populations did not have.
Right, but the point is that the Mexicans probably have a greater minority hand, so to speak, minority poker hand than Black Americans because of what their ancestors went through during the colonization by the Europeans. So if you buy into that framework, if you view that framework as legitimate, then you should be like making way for all the Hispanic people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Well,
but
that's why I really like this article, and I really like the poster that somebody just hung up in Mexico City anonymously saying, "We don't want you here, leave," because it's really showing white liberals that no one likes them and that they ruin everything. And if they actually cared about people who are, in their eyes, people of color and oppressed and disadvantaged, then they wouldn't be using up their resources and everything. But obviously they don't, because they're not leaving. And more Americans are moving to Mexico and taking up resources and driving costs of living up for the locals. But it also is like, good, get a taste of your own medicine, because you're also going to see that it's not just America who is racist.
right.
Because they believe that racism only happens in America. And that how could these white people say that they want Mexican immigrants to go home and illegal immigrants to leave? These Americans are legal immigrants to Mexico, and the Mexicans don't want them there.
Right.
They have just as much hatred and racism for immigrants to their country as some Americans have for immigrants to our country.
Yeah.
I don't even think it's as bad here, the hatred for immigrants, as it is in other countries.
No, it's not.
Most places hate immigrants no matter where they're coming from.
The United States is the least homogenous country in the world.
Because
Bar
we
none.
don't hate immigrants. I mean, there's always going to be people that don't.
My point is that it's not. Yeah, it's the least homogenous country in the world, which means that we're used to living in a multicultural, multiracial society.
Well, it's always been
Most
that way.
places aren't.
Yeah.
Japan's not letting in legions of Africans. They're not letting in.
They don't like
They're not
white
even letting
people.
in Chinese. They don't let in anyone.
like anybody.
So the point is that even like you look at places like Sweden, they say, look at how good Sweden is. Sweden's like 99% white.
Yeah.
Germany's like 98% white. Even the UK, which has been opening up the immigration floodgates, is still like 95% white. Then you look at the United States, it's 60% white. And so my point is that, number one, the United States is the most welcoming to immigrants anywhere in the world. It doesn't mean that we don't have problems regarding that. But also, I think that countries do have the right to regulate their immigration as they see fit. If they want to say, we're not going to let in Americans or other people from majority white countries, fine. I don't care. We don't share your heritage. If you want to preserve your heritage and you see this as a threat to you, if you want to create a Hispanic ethno-state, fine. That's not the culture that I want to live in, but you have the right to do that within your own borders. And it's just like, and I think these left-wingers are going to get a rude awakening as to just how good America is in terms of immigrants and multiculturalism and multiracialism. You're not going to get that same treatment anywhere else.
Right. Well, and I think it's also just a testament to how unique America is and how different we are, because we're the only country, save maybe Canada, who didn't start with its own culture.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you consider Native Americans, but even then it's not really one culture because it's based on the tribe that you're a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And between tribes, the culture is very different. So it is like the one region of the world where the culture is not so cemented in and the tradition is so rich and old. Like even France has a tradition and a culture. Germany has a tradition and a culture. And it's like America has always been one of multiculturalism because there was no root culture other than freedom.
Right.
That's the only thing that binds the states together is a sense of freedom.
Right.
And a right to freedom.
And it really is culture. Like we have the culture of liberty and freedom,
right.
which is what you're saying, which is what binds us together. But then you look at even homogenous regions of the world like Europe. The French and the UK have a historical grievance against each other, despite the fact that they're both pasty white.
That's true, because it's not a race thing, it's a culture thing.
Right. They're both pasty white. They both are Christian nations.
Yes.
Not anymore, but historically.
Yeah.
And yet they were engaged in wars with each other all throughout the centuries. It's like, so it really just boils down to culture. It's not race. I mean, race is a part of culture, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it really is just a boiling down of culture. And the United States is magical in a way because we took our culture above all of the individual subcultures. And we said, our culture is liberty and freedom. Our culture is I'm allowed to be Christian and you're allowed to be Muslim. That's our culture.
Which is why you've seen such a birth of so many different subcultures within America, because we have the freedom to have subcultures, depending on religion, race, creed, heritage, immigration status, music taste, hobbies, whatever. There's like all different kinds of subcultures. And I mean, even in cities, there's always like a Chinatown or a German village or a whatever. So people, even if they're immigrants, they still find each other within America because they have the freedom to do so and to maintain their heritage within this country. Whereas if you are American and go anywhere else, you are expected to assimilate to the culture and speak the language because they don't look kindly on you as an immigrant. Whereas here we're like, you should probably learn English, but if you don't, I guess you probably know somebody who can translate for you, and it's not that big of a deal. And there's also pockets within the country where you can go and still be around your people and your culture. That's just not the way anywhere else. If you are going somewhere, you absolutely have to assimilate, which is why these Mexicans who live in Mexico City are not happy with these whiteys that are coming from Southern California. I guess they're not all white, but the Americans that are coming from Southern California because they are refusing to assimilate, as in the case of this Rodwell lady. She's like, I'm just going to take whatever I can because I'm from America and I'm oppressed there and I'm allowed to. And the Mexicans are going, doesn't apply here. We don't give a shit.
Right.
Leave.
Right. It's ridiculous.
It says... The LA Times article also said that for the cost of a $2,000 one bedroom in Koreatown, an Angelino can rent a penthouse here.
That sounds appealing.
A staggering difference.
Yeah. I can see why the Mexicans are unhappy because it's just like they see this influx of foreigners coming in and taking their real estate and they can't compete because the Americans coming in are rich by Mexican standards. They're just rich. So...
yeah.
It'd be like somebody coming into your neighborhood from China and just buying up all the property. It's like, what the hell are you doing?
Right. Well, and at the very end of the article, which I think is the next clip, it says, if you're not there, it's okay. It said something like...
No, this was the last one you had.
Oh. There was, I guess I didn't clip it then, but there was another thing that said, Americans who are looking to immigrate to Mexico for whatever reason need to keep in mind that it's inexpensive for you, but it is not inexpensive for Mexicans. Like it's very expensive for them to live in a city in their own country. I mean, it's a poorer nation. It's not all of the money is within the government. The people have like nothing.
And the cartels.
Well, what I said.
All right. Do you want to talk about some egregious news? So we're going to play a game.
Okay.
Guess where that headline's going.
Okay.
Okay. Are you ready? I don't know if let me know if you've heard of this story because I don't want to spoil the surprise. But if you haven't, then I want you to guess.
Okay.
All right. Ready? So here we go. This headline. Did you hear about this one?
No.
Okay. This headline says, it's from CNN. It says, an entire North Carolina police department resigned after a black woman town manager was hired. Guess where that headline's going?
Oh, no.
So obviously the implication is what?
A black woman is in town and they hate it, so they quit.
Well, she became the town manager, but yeah. Yeah, so the police department quits.
Well, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
She's like, she's new in town or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
This town ain't big enough for the both of us or whatever kind of a thing. Oh. Now I have to try to figure out why they all left, right?
Well, yeah, so
I'm guessing the two are not related in any way. They just happen to coincide.
okay.
I have a feeling that there was probably something else going down in the police department, maybe with like job requirements that the department was not in favor of doing. And so in solidarity, they all quit. And it just happened to be at the same time that a new town manager was being hired.
You're close.
Am I close?
You're
Or they have a difference in political opinion, but they're trying to spin it as a racial thing.
That is much closer.
Okay.
So obviously the implication of this headline is that they quit because a black woman became town manager. And I'm just going to show, so this isn't just a CNN problem, okay? Look at this. From Essence, a town hired a black woman manager, the entire police force quit.
Why are we making it about race and sex? What, like, how about you say a Democrat manager was hired and the entire police force quit?
Right, so that's Essence, right? Here's a place called The Root. This is all top Google searches. The hire of a black town manager catalyzes entire police department to resign, right?
Well, at least they didn't say she's a woman in it.
Hold on. Yahoo News. A North Carolina city hired a black town manager, then its entire police force resigned. So all of these headlines from 4 different outlets at least
have the same headline.
Have the same headline saying, oh, look at, and the implication is, of course, look at how racist policing in America is. They couldn't even stand to have a black woman as their town manager. You have to go down to something like the 17th paragraph in the CNN article to find this gem. And this gem says, others in the community say they believe there's not a racial component to the situation due to the fact that the previous town manager was a black man. The previous town manager was a black man.
Well, I imagine half of the police force is also black because it's North Carolina.
Probably.
That was one of the free states. There's
right.
a lot of freed slave families in North Carolina. I imagine a lot of the police are black. I bet even the police chief is black. Yeah. If I had to put my money on it.
I wish I would have looked into that.
Oh,
but I
yeah. We could do it right now.
So the previous town manager was black. And so you were exactly right. So the rest of the CNN article, I didn't clip anything else. I just wanted to show how blatant this was.
Some residents also cautioned against jumping to conclusions, saying they've always had a good relationship with the police department.
So the reason why they quit is because the black woman that came in was progressive and started micromanaging all the police and saying, you have to do this, you can't do that. Basically, you're not allowed to do your job. She was writing up police officers for not being at their desks when their clock started, when their work clock started.
Even like field officers?
Even when they were on the job. If they weren't at their desk, they would get a write-up. So she came in, she started being overbearing, micromanaging, and demanding policy changes that the police didn't like. That's why they quit. They quit because she was creating a hostile work environment because she was being so overbearing, as progressives are. She basically came in like a wrecking ball and just started wreaking havoc on their normal processes. And they said, we're not going to work with this. We're done. So it was her actions that catalyzed the quitting of the police department. The fact that
she just happens to be black and a woman.
Race was not a component. It says others in the community say they believe there's not a racial component. There's guaranteed not a racial component because they would have quit before she became.
They would have quit when the black man was hired that was doing the same job. North Carolina is like a pretty 50-50 state of white and black people.
Is it? I don't know if it's that high.
There's a pretty high black
It's higher than
population.
National average, probably, but not 50-50. Anyway.
What? Can we look up the city and see what the police force looked like?
But keep talking because I have to boot everything up.
Well, I have not heard about that story. Was that recently that happened? Or is it just now making news because she was like, let me be progressive and
week or so
play off of this? Leave it to the progressives to be terrible, ruin their entire city, and then blame it on race.
So I got the Google demographic information here.
10.4 million people in the state. What percentage is black? 22%.
22%. Yeah. So it's higher than national average, which is like 16 or 14% or something.
Okay.
So it's higher than average. You're right about that. But 50-50 is not. I don't think there's a 50-50
Anywhere.
non-majority state anywhere. So, but anyway. So yeah, that was just a blatant and egregious example of fake news.
I want to see what this police force looked like before. What's the name of the city?
I don't have the name of the city, so we should probably move on because I don't want to spend all the time Googling.
Fine. Well,
here, I'll play a Matt Gaetz video while you're looking it up.
Okay.
So Matt Gaetz was asked a question about, he made a comment about pro-abortion protesters being fat and ugly.
Well, they are. Have you seen them?
And he was asked about this, and so his response is wonderful. So here we go. This is Matt Gaetz responding to a question from a reporter. Play.
Is it safe to say that based off of your comments, you're suggesting that these women at these abortion rallies are ugly and overweight?
Yes.
What do you say to people who think that those comments are offensive?
Be offended.
I mean, if you're offended, okay, if you're ugly, it's hard to fix that, but you're probably mostly ugly because you scream ugly things and are just appalling in general.
Yeah.
But if you're fat, you can do something about that. You have the ability to lose weight, and also if you are a nicer person, you'd probably stop being so ugly.
Yeah, and what I like about this is like I think Matt Gaetz is one of the few people who represents a shift in the Republican Party where it's like, yeah, you can call us bigoted and offended or offensive and all those things, and we're just going to say, fine, be offended, right?
Yeah.
Call us bigots, call us racist. We don't care.
You should be offended because you know what? When we stopped offending people, that's when all of these crazies that are mentally ill and overweight and all the other stuff started thinking that they actually had power and could do whatever they want and started walking all over everybody who was healthy. And normal. And that's how we're getting all of this grooming shit and all of this weird transing the kid stuff because we didn't want to offend adults who probably needed to be offended and bullied a little bit so they could turn out normal. It's an act of love, people. Be offended. You know what? If you're offended, maybe you'll make a positive change to your life.
Right.
It's not that hard.
Let's watch it again because that was so good.
I have no idea.
Is it safe to say that based off of your comments, you're suggesting that these women at these abortion rallies are ugly and overweight?
Yes.
What do you say to people who think that those comments are offensive?
Be offended.
And that was the whole thing.
That was the
I
whole
wonder what
clip.
the reporter's response was to that.
She says, at the end.
That's all she said.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that based off of your comments, you're suggesting that these women at these abortion rallies are ugly and overweight?
Yes.
What do you say to people who think that those comments are offensive?
Be offended.
She goes, like
That's
she was
awesome.
expecting a different answer. Because reporters will do this, right? They use it. It's not a genuine question. It's a question designed to attack you. Oh, people say X, Y, and Z. That's not a real question, right?
It's not a question at all.
Right. It's
People
just,
said it? Oh, okay.
right. Yeah, it's like,
What's your point?
yeah, so they just use that as another attack vector. They mask it up in their professionalism. They ask a question that's very loaded that is designed to attack. But you disarm that by just saying, I don't care.
Well,
exactly like you did.
They use it as an attack vector because they want to throw your own words back at you as if it's an insult. But the difference between why that doesn't work against the right, but it does against the left, is that on the right, typically people say what they mean and mean what they say. They just can't be afraid of the backlash. They have to double down on what they say for it to have any effect. On the left, when you throw their words back at them, they have to like play these mind games with themselves to try to make it make sense. And it's like, but you are the one that said this thing. And then they're like, no, I didn't say that. And it's like, it's literally your own words. When on the right, you say, oh, you said that women at abortion rallies are fat and ugly. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. You heard me right the first time.
Yeah.
But people are offended by that. Okay. Yeah, they probably would be.
Right.
That's why I said it. It's not the same. It doesn't work that well against people on the right. You see this with Marjorie Taylor Greene a lot too. Like they'll try to throw her words back at her and she's like, why are you repeating what I said? Basically.
Yeah.
Like any reporter that does that to her, she's like, why are you approaching me? What is your point? Do you have a question for me? And they're like, well, you said this thing. Yeah. and she doesn't have the
Yeah.
time for it.
And that's nice because it's
So-
like it's so frustrating because when a politician does like a walk back of what they said, it's because you could tell that they're just trying to carefully craft everything they say. And as soon as anyone bristles at anything, they're like, got to revise, got to walk back, got to purify my image. But then it's like you're not being genuine at that
Yeah.
point. Like you are literally. This is, I think, why politicians like will stutter all the time, like Jen Psaki and others when they're in leadership positions, and they go, you know, we've had this policy in place for 10 years, and they say and they stutter, and the reason is because they literally don't know what they're going to say next. They have to go through all this computation to make sure that the word that they're picking next is the accurate one that's going to minimize their attacks and also give them
Hey.
enough plausible deniability so that they can come back later and say, oh, well, that's not really what I meant. Like, they're trying to weave all of these calculations together in their mind to create the maximum opportunity for squirmage later.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why they started, that's why they say, But then you look at people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they just come out and speak. They don't stutter. They don't go, They're not calculating everything they say. Why? Because they're being genuine. They're speaking to the people. They're giving their honest opinions. And that is revealed by the fact that they don't back down when questioned by journalists. They say, nope, I said that and I meant it.
Or then you get Kayleigh McEnany, who's press secretary, and she does this whole big, press conference about some tragedy that happened in some small town in America, and then none of the reporters ask any questions, and she goes, does no one want to ask me questions about what happened? No, I just gave you this whole long thing. We don't want to ask questions about that. Okay, well, let me flip to that page in my book that you want to talk about.
Right. Yeah, that was the other thing.
That's
didn't,
awesome.
Kayleigh McEnany didn't really stutter or go
Never,
or anything either,
ever.
because she had a freaking 900-page binder.
Hundreds of
Yeah,
tabs.
and she was like, oh, the NPC is on this program today. Whoop.
and she was like, oh, you're asking this question? Look, I predicted that. Here is my answer to that question.
Actually, that book that she had was probably just the NPC user manual.
Probably.
She was just like,
She's
just
like, oh, we're playing this game.
oh, it's
okay.
spitting out error code abortion. Let's just flip to that one.
Or it's like NPC in Skyrim, and it's like, X for this response.
Yeah.
Toggling between the two answers.
Yeah.
Up arrow, X. Okay. Where are you going, traveler?
You could probably do
Oh
that.
my
Like people do those
God.
edits, like where it's a real life exchange, but then they put the Oblivion music over
Yeah.
it, and it's just like the weirdest like fantasy music, and the guys saying nonsense
Yeah.
things. They could probably do that with a lot of press briefings too. Just
God.
weird exchanges.
I don't even watch the press briefings anymore because Karen Jean-Pierre is worse to watch than Jen Psaki.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was possible. She is unbearable.
Mm-hmm.
Unbearable. I would have to record her speaking, clip out every time she says and then piece the edits together just to get a sentence to figure out what she's saying, because it takes her so long to get out words that have meaning and string them together that by the time she gets to the end of the sentence, I forgot what the question was that she was answering.
Yeah.
I lose focus very quickly with her.
You know who else is
Speaking.
a big violator of? I'm gonna coin the term right now. I'm gonna call it the intellectual stutter.
Ugh, yeah.
How's that?
Yeah.
It's
I've heard you say that before.
It's well, okay, maybe I haven't coined it just now then, but it's just like in-group signaling, right? It's the tone and the mannerisms and the idiosyncrasies that you adopt to signal that you're part of the intellectual class. That's
Which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because actual intellectuals rarely, if ever, say or stutter.
I think it just goes back to how genuine are you being,
Yeah.
right? Like you look at any professor at college, you might not agree with their worldview, but if they feel genuinely or believe genuinely what they're saying, they're not going to stutter. They're going to cover the whole concept X to Z orally in perfect structure,
Yes.
easy to follow.
Yeah.
Like they're writing a paper, but they're just speaking in front of an audience.
Well, that's how you know someone's really knowledgeable in their field also.
Mm-hmm.
Because any question that you ask them, they have a 2-minute answer for you because they've encountered it so much or
Yeah.
have had that question asked to them so many times that they have a mini dissertation prepared every time it's asked.
It's either that they either know they've already heard the question or already thought about it, or they understand the field so well that
They
even
can
when
craft an answer. Yeah.
even when presented with a novel question, they have an answer because they're like, oh, it works like this.
And sometimes they'll take a beat to think about it if it's a really well-crafted question that they've never been asked before. And they might go, or before they start speaking,
Right.
just to think. But then they take off and they don't stutter or say again. I mean, some professors have a natural stutter.
Right. I'm not talking
Or
about natural.
They trip over themselves because they're speaking too fast, but that's not
That's
the
a
same.
common issue,
That's not
too.
the same. Yeah, that's not the same thing as going, well, the thing is with
Right.
and you're like, yes, haven't even started your sentence yet.
You know who else? So who else is a big offender of the intellectual stutter is Pete Buttigieg. Pete Butt Stuff.
I know, he's really he's pee butt stuff.
No.
He's really bad about it. But again, he's like Karen Jean Pair, where he'll start a sentence and then by the time he finishes it, I've forgotten what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Because he takes too long. Like, there's too much space in between each word.
He's also one of those people that looks too much like an animal. He looks like
What
a
kind
gopher.
of animal? Oh, no.
You've met people like that, right? You're like,
It's because his ears stick out and he's got those buck teeth.
yeah. You've met those people where they just they look uncomfortably like an animal.
I was wondering why he looked so strange. Because every time I see him, I'm like, there's something wrong with you, but I can't figure out what it is.
He jumped straight out of the Animorphs book.
Or he's a meerkat, because I feel like he's real,
Oh, yeah.
real springy, too.
Yeah, and he's short.
Mm.
Meerkats are like 2.5 feet tall. Did
They're
you know
little.
that? They're tiny.
They're little.
Yeah,
They're
I
like
thought-
cats, but they always
I
stand
thought they
up
were
on their
like
feet.
man size, like 5 feet tall. That'd
You
be scary.
did?
Yeah, not
They're
recently
like-
when I was younger.
Oh.
And then I found out they were like little babies. I was like, what?
Yeah.
When did no?
Didn't
why
you
did no?
watch The Lion King?
But it was a cartoon. You can't judge the size.
Yeah, but Timon was a meerkat.
All right,
next
whatever.
to Pumbaa, who was the big boar.
Whatever. Timon's
Can you
probably
imagine
a
if
freaking liberal.
meerkats were the size of kangaroos?
Yeah, that'd be kind of.
Oy. Those
Well,
tunnels must be ginormous.
You'd have Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
Pee-pee butts. You are so immature. You are so
Wait, what's
immature.
his middle name? Does it start with P?
No, do not
come
stop.
on. If it starts with P,
So wait,
you can move on, but I'm gonna look it up.
So his name might be Peter Buttigieg.
No, Peter Paul.
Oh, it could be. Look up his middle name. But this is your story next. So
Oh, well.
well, I'll talk about my story
you can
first
talk
while
about
you're
it.
looking up. Okay, so in other politics news, this is from Axios. No.
It's Peter Paul.
So his name.
Pee-pee butt stuff. He's Peter Paul Montgomery Buttigieg. I'm guessing Montgomery is his husband's last name? Maybe?
Is it hyphenated? His
No.
No, then it's not his husband's.
Then he's Paul Montgomery, middle name.
PP butt stuff.
PP butt
what
stuff.
What a great
I
discovery.
can't believe it. He does look like a gopher. Okay, I can't. Oh.
The simulation winks again. Wait, should I
He
pull up a
also
gopher?
looks a little bit like the Grinch. Or like a who.
So let's pull up a gopher on the screen. So we got gopher, and then we got to do Buttigieg. How do you spell his name?
Butt gig.
Butt.
Booty gig.
I'm just pulling this up. This episode has gone off the rails,
I never
but
started on them.
that's okay. We're turning into a comedy podcast now. So,
It's a political comedy. A poll
so here's
Oh, wait.
Pete Buttigieg, PP stuff.
Pee-pee butt stuff.
Oh, not print.
Oh, wait.
So there's Pete Buttigieg, and then there's a gopher.
Doesn't he look like a Who from Whoville?
Yes, he's got that button nose.
And the smile that looks like he might be the Grinch.
That's not a good gopher picture. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. The resemblance. The resemblance is there.
Oi!
Maybe this one?
Well, he screeches.
Oh,
Why
my
male
goodness.
gophers start to hibernate midsummer?
Okay, we're
Isn't
not
that
going.
what Pete Butt Stuff did when his kids came to...
It is.
to the world?
It is.
He went away for 4 months?
He went on maternity leave for, like 4 months during the middle of an energy crisis or something. Or no,
A transportation crisis.
yeah, the cars
You know,
and
his
whatnot.
job.
Anyway, back onto the subject of politics. You are
What an opportune coincidence.
the simulation winks again.
I was like, Peter Paul, maybe? It's literally Peter Paul Buttigieg.
Anyway, the House
Yes.
passed an assault weapons ban.
I saw this and I was like, I bet Jacob's going to talk about it, so I didn't clip it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say other than
On certain semi-automatic weapons.
the thing that I wanted to talk about actually was more of like a Michael Malice interpretation of this, which is just that. So this passed 217 to 214, I believe. I believe it was a 3 or 4 vote margin in the House.
Okay.
That just reveals the absurdity of democracy. Like, how absurd is it on its face that by a majority of 3 individuals, you can strip the rights away from millions of Americans?
I thought there were protections against that.
What? The Constitution?
From no. Well, yes. No, that small margin of error.
Well, that's what the Senate hasn't done anything with it yet.
Oh, just the House.
Just the House. So that is
Oh.
like the bicameral legislature is a way of preventing slim majorities from getting what they want because the Senate is representative of the states and the House is
Yeah, but
representative of the people. But
If the Senate also has a slim margin like that, though,
but the fact that it can happen in principle, I
It's
think, is like
ridiculous.
it's what Michael Malice talks about all the time, which is that it's just absurd on its face that people can vote to take your rights from you.
yeah.
Like that is just, we're conditioned to think democracy is this good thing, but like when Michael Malice talks about it, it's like, yeah, it is absurd. Why we shouldn't be able to
Yeah.
stand for somebody censoring me or disarming me or any other manner of things, taking my property away from me, like income taxes without my consent, right?
Yeah.
But it's like we've normalized this, and now we're just beating each other with the bludgeon of government every time the power shifts, and it's like
Well,
I don't know, it's like it's just absurd.
again, when people hold democracy as sacred and it is their papal state or the vehicle by which the papal state operates, then you just end up with like the Catholic Church in the 1400s, where they're taking tithes, which is just a tax that the church is allowed to take for no reason at all. And then they're also the ruling body of government. And when you commit a crime, you have to report to the church before you report to the state.
And they'll
It's
give
the
you
same
indulgences.
thing.
No cash bail. They'll give you indulgences
Yeah.
if you're part of the correct group.
Exactly. It's the same thing. It's just they refuse to acknowledge it as being a religion and that the United States is a religious country and is ruled by a church. They always say it's a separation of church and state, except that the state has become the church. And so that expression is meaningless once again. And the idea was to keep the state out of the church, not the church out of the state. However, because that expression has been so misinterpreted, now that the state is becoming the church, it's just kind of null and void.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't mean
It's a
scrub.
secular church
Yeah.
now, but
It doesn't mean scrub all evidence of religion from the public sphere. It just means all religions are equally accessible, or
Right.
the public sphere is equally accessible to all religions.
the state is not allowed to determine which churches are allowed to operate and which ones aren't, is basically
Exactly.
what that expression meant.
And it's not
because that's why Anglicans came here in the first place,
Mhm.
was so that, well, not Anglicans, I guess, but
Puritans.
Puritans, Protestants, because they were trying to get away from the Anglican church and they were like, we should probably prevent this from ever happening again. Except now it's a secular church. So riddle me that, founders.
But the thing is, like, I don't know if we've had this conversation before on the podcast, so stop me if I haven't, but there's something, I don't remember if I just started saying this or if it's an idea. It's probably an idea, the benevolent king problem. Have I
think
talked about this?
I don't think you've talked about it, but I think I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about this.
Okay, yeah.
This
So,
idea?
so the idea is that the ideal system of government is to have a benevolent king, a king that is all wise, all powerful, genuinely cares for his subjects, is genuinely fair, wants justice, all of those things, right? Because then you have a system under which the king is all powerful and he's very smart and very wise, and he's going to make all of the best decisions.
Right.
And he can do so without red tape, right? The problem, of course, with the benevolent king situation is his successor is not guaranteed to have the same qualities.
Right.
You might have a reign of 10 benevolent kings because that's just tradition. But eventually you're going to get that one sour apple that's motivated by his own power or his own greed, or is simply just incompetent and not wise, didn't put time into his studies, doesn't care that much, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And that's when everything falls apart, because the king then starts to treat his subjects as cogs in a machine for him to be used, and then you get all the problems that arise from monarchy. So it's not that a monarchy is inherently bad, it's that it's susceptible to corruption easily, right?
Yeah.
And this is the same thing true for any dictatorship in the modern era, right?
Well, anytime any one person has all of the power,
Right.
there is a lot that can go wrong there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we're talking in times of monarchy, sometimes 11-year-olds were becoming king.
Right.
Or even younger, and that's a problem. Like, I think there have been 6-year-olds that were crowned king, and they always had someone that they were placed in the charge of who was helping advise them. However, you still run into a lot of problems when your monarch is
Right.
not mature at all.
And the reason I bring that up is because, so that's the ideal system of government, is having a benevolent king.
Yeah.
But we obviously don't want to structure society around expecting the king to have certain qualities, so we distribute it, right? And that's
Right.
why we sort of invented democracy. It's because like, oh, what's this distributed decision-making system, and also we're going to put limits on the democracy in the form of the rights of the Constitution to make sure that the democracy, no matter what majorities are garnered, cannot do things like infringe. But here's the point. That doesn't seem to be working very well either.
No.
Because our rights are still being infringed by a majority of people. And it doesn't happen, it happens in small bursts, right? 50 years ago, X happened, and then 50 years later, Y happened. But it all adds up to the steady erosion of our rights. And I just don't know, like, what is the solution? Is democracy really the best we can do? Obviously Michael Malice would say, well, we need an anarchic system, but I think that has its own flaws too. So what?
Yeah, there's no way that an anarcho-capitalist society could work in this large of a country.
No, I don't think he's saying it's all unified. I think he's saying you have many small anarchic communities.
I don't see a problem with allowing like one state or another to try out the anarcho-capitalist society, because that's why we have states, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it is within the purview of the states to decide that that's what they're going to do. And if people don't like it, they can move, of course. But I think it would be wise if the federal government just said, okay, you can try it. But I also don't think that would ever happen. I mean, I guess they're trying to get that going in New Hampshire. Not necessarily anarcho-capitalist, but they're trying to get it to be the Free State Project,
Right.
which is basically
Well, my point is,
anarcho-capitalism.
I don't know how you maintain democracy in a way that stays well outside the bounds of infringing on rights. Like, you might start that way. Of course, the United States started that way. The federal government was fairly weak. But Supreme Court cases come along, laws come along.
Yeah.
Eventually, all this power gets accumulated in the federal government, which means, in turn, that it's accumulated within the Democratic majority. Because if the Democratic majority can elect people to the federal government to do things that are in the federal government's power, then they have power over you, right? Do you see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, you build up all these court cases, set precedent. Now the federal government has all this power. Now the majority has more power because they
Right.
elect the federal government. So what's the solution? What do we do about that? I don't know. Maybe it's the best we've got.
Well, it's almost like we've provided or we've given up too much of our individual power to that of the government at this point via welfare programs and our laws and different acts and bills and things that we vote on within our states and communities and within the federal government, that it's like you'd almost have to strip it down to the studs and start all over.
But then you would just,
But
Michael Malice
then-
would say it would just get the same way that it is now in 250 years again. It's not a permanent fix.
No, it isn't. But then it also seems like there is no other country in the world that is doing any good without democracy. And there are some countries who say they have democracy and they're worse off for it because it's like Mexico and actually it's just a cartel running the whole place.
Right.
So they have a democracy, except that no one has anything good happening to them
Mm-hmm.
within the confines of the government system.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, buy an island and move there?
Guess you could.
I think there's private islands for sale still. I think it'd be good if politicians on the right especially started referring to our governmental system as a republic,
Yeah.
not a democracy, because I think that would be a real slap in the face to all of the lefties who are like, our democracy. They could be like, actually,
Our
it's a
republic.
republic,
Right.
not a democracy. Because all of these, especially young progressives, think that it's just majority rules. Because they always say, well, how can the majority of Americans want something? They say that in the case of like Roe v. Wade or whatever, but it actually is not the majority of Americans that want that. But they use false statistics and they say, how could it be that the majority of Americans want such and such thing to happen and it still doesn't happen? Because they think it's just a pure democracy, where even if it's majority by rule of one, it should still apply. But that's not how republics work. There are checks and balances within republics to make sure that it actually is a fair vote, and it protects against those slim margins.
Right.
So I think it would be wise for politicians on the right to start referring to it as a republic and remind people what a republic is and how it functions, so that they can combat this cry for sacred democracy a little bit better and more effectively.
Start leaning into the idea that we're a republic and that states should have the power.
Yeah.
That's probably the best that you can do, right? Because then the excesses of democracy at least can be contained to whatever state is,
Well, and if they want to keep
problematic.
if they on the left want to keep redefining terminology so much to the point where they're changing what the word democracy means, because that's where it's heading, because they keep saying our democracy, they're eventually going to change the definition of it. I don't know to what, but they're going to start pushing for a change in definition. So I think if we start saying now on the right that it's a republic, even when that definitional change happens, we'll be leaning on the definition of republic, and it won't really matter what that definition has become.
Yeah.
And then it's ammunition in an argument against someone on the left to say, you're arguing about this arbitrary word now, democracy, when in fact we are talking about our system of government in the United States as it is a republic. So I think that would just be better. I don't know how to fix the actual problems that our governmental system has created.
I think my point is you don't necessarily fix the problems, but you can minimize them.
But I don't even know where to start, though.
That's what we just talked about. You minimize the problems of the excesses of democracy by having 50 mini-democracies within a Republican system of government. Because then California can exceed its democracy, ban assault weapons, whatever, and you can say, that's an infringement of my rights, and then move to Idaho.
Right.
So it's like, I think that's...
But I guess Michael Malice isn't even for state governments, though.
No, he's not. But I think I have a hunch that if you'd ask him, he would say yes, a Republican form of government is preferable because you get closer to an anarchic state in that situation, right? If you have a bunch of 50 semi-autonomous states, that is closer to anarchy than having one unified state, right? So I think he would probably say a Republican form of democracy gets closer to anarchy because it gets closer to local rule. Yeah. But he would still be, he still wouldn't be okay with like the police system and the arbitration.
I guess that kind of goes back to this idea that we talked about before is, do you value security more than freedom, or do you value freedom more than security? Because a lot of these problems that we see within our government have stemmed from people valuing security over freedom.
Right.
In a lot of places, especially blue states. That's very apparent. And in red states, they're like, I value my freedom over my security.
Right.
Because if you give me my freedom, I can provide my own security.
Right. And I can also do things that might otherwise be disallowed, like shoot guns on my property because it's fun. Anyway, we got this one. No trade backs.
No trade backs. I don't want her back. Anyway, I don't know if you know about this, but a WNBA player, nobody's heard of this because nobody cares about the WNBA, but a WNBA player was detained a few months ago in Russia because she had cannabis in her luggage on her person, and that's illegal in Russia. You're not allowed to do that. So they've had her detained for quite a few months since the end of basketball season in the winter in like February. And the United States is trying to bring her home, obviously, because she is a United States citizen, and they're saying it's unlawful that she's being detained in Russia, which it probably is. Like, they could probably just charge her a hefty fine and send her home and call it a day, but it's illegal in Russia. So and this was kind of just a way to get a dig at us, and she's relatively famous, I suppose. But they want to bring her back, and the only way that they're realizing that that's going to happen is by trading convict for convict. So the CNN report says Russian officials requested adding convicted murderer to the Griner-Whelan prisoner swap. So the WNBA player is Griner, and then Whelan is, I believe it was someone who was accompanying the team. They were also detained. I can't quite remember.
I don't know who that is.
And that's just the title again, by Natasha Bertrand and some other guy. So they offered one Russian prisoner that we have, and now Russia's like, well, if we're giving you 2 people back, we want 2 people back,
Right.
essentially. Russian government officials requested that a former colonel from the country's domestic spy agency, who was convicted of murder in Germany last year, be included in the U.S.'s proposed swap of a notorious arms dealer, Victor Bout, for Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. Multiple sources familiar with the discussions told CNN. So we're talking an assassin and an arms dealer for a nobody basketball player and another nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem like a fair trade?
No, but the United States has literally no leverage over Russia anymore because we blew everything with the sanctions.
Right.
We used up all of our cards.
Yep.
And then we didn't have the foresight to say, hey, Americans, don't travel to Russia because we don't have any leverage to get you out.
Right. They should have just banned travel to Russia.
This is pure incompetence. You know, Donald Trump, he understands power games extremely well. He always keeps a nuclear option in his back pocket. He never plays it.
Nope.
But he demonstrates that he is willing to use his power by doing other things. But he always keeps the nuclear option with him, right?
I promise not to do this to Greenland.
Yeah, he would not have gone all out on the sanctions when this war broke out. I guarantee you. Because why? Because he'd want to have those sanctions in case of something like this, where they arrest somebody. He can call them up and say, hey, I still have all of these sanctions that I can put on your pathetic little nation, right? You release those prisoners. And Donald Trump did this with multiple prisoners from other nations. He got them out with nothing. They'd exchanged nothing.
The other problem, though, too, is that Biden's already put into place all of these sanctions on Russia, but he should have never revoked them to begin with.
Who?
Biden. The original sanctions that Trump had placed on Russia,
oh, that's right.
Biden lifted them.
Like the Nord Stream 2.
Yes, Biden lifted them and then replaced some of the sanctions, but didn't replace the Nord Stream 2 sanction.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is no leverage because all of those other sanctions are pitiful compared to the Nord Stream 2 sanction. And so if you're not going to do that, then you have nothing against Russia. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Trump would have had these other sanctions in his back pocket, but he also wasn't stupid enough to revoke the Nord Stream 2 sanction. He's the one that put it there for good reason. And then Russia was scared for 4 years and didn't do shit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of like, you can stay there in Russia for the length of your conviction because it's not worth a murderer and an arms dealer for a basketball player.
Right.
I'm sure the conditions in Russian prison are not ideal. They're probably much worse than American prisons, but what it sounds like is it's a relatively short conviction, like about a year, and they are allowed to go through trial in Russia. And then if they're convicted, they are going to be there for another couple years.
Well, they'll hold her indefinitely because the Biden administration has already signaled that they're willing to negotiate. So even if this negotiation falls through, they'll just hold her.
She's kind of screwed.
Yeah, this is why if you're going to blow all of your strategic leverage, you tell Americans, warn them, do not travel to Russia because we are not going to be able to bail you out. They didn't say that, though. They didn't give any warning to, maybe there was some State Department warnings. I don't know, but...
Okay, but also this bitch is retarded. Like, why are you taking drugs internationally?
Well, it goes back, they take for granted the United States.
And even if you are allowed to have drugs, I am guessing she lives somewhere where cannabis is legal.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it's legal in that area of the United States in which you live, it is not legal everywhere in the United States.
It's not legal to take it on a plane.
It's not legal to take it on a plane. It's not legal in over half of the states still. And it sure as hell is not legal in most of the countries of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you a dumbass and taking it with you? And somebody
Right.
said it was cannabis oil that she uses for pain. And I'm like, you're just going to have to deal with the pain
Yeah.
while you're out of the country. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of problems with her, but yeah, also a lot of fault on the administration.
They should have never let the WNBA team go in the first place,
Right.
because that's a lot of Americans to account for in a time of crisis.
When you're fighting a proxy war with the nation that they're going to.
Exactly. Maybe don't go there.
Yeah.
Why don't you go to Japan? Like, that's fine. The Russians communicated the request to the U.S. earlier this month through an informal back channel used by the spy agency known as the FSB, that they wanted Vadim Krazakov released, the sources said. Krazakov was convicted in December of murdering a former Chechen fighter, Zelimkhan Tornica Hoy.
He murdered somebody. We don't need to know all the details of how he murdered
somebody. Yeah, but he murdered them in Berlin in 2019 and is sentenced to life in prison. The request was seen as problematic for several reasons, the sources told CNN, among them that Krasakov remains in German custody. As such, and because the request was not communicated formally, but rather through the FSB back channel, the U.S. government did not view it as a legitimate counter to the U.S.'s offer, which was first revealed by CNN on Wednesday. So the original offer was for the arms dealer.
Right.
And then they wanted to throw in this other guy. Adrian Watson, a spokesperson for the National Security Council, told CNN after this story was published that, quote, holding two wrongfully detained Americans hostage for the release of a Russian assassin in a third country's custody is not a serious counteroffer. It is a bad faith attempt to avoid the deal on the table that Russia should take. I don't know why they should take it, but whatever. National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications John Kirby echoed Watson on Friday, calling Russia's request a bad faith attempt to avoid a very serious offer during an interview with CNN's Jim, whatever, it doesn't matter. He added, we urge Russia to take that offer seriously. Pressed by the CNN interviewer on whether this development signals negotiations are stalled, Kirby said he would not describe the current situation that way. Quote, it's just that they have been willing to faithfully consider or even seriously consider the offer that we put forward. I would not say stalled. We very much want to see Brittany and Paul come home to their families where they belong. They're wrongfully detained there, and we're just going to keep at that work. And then there's one more. I think this is the last one. But U.S. officials believe Russia is just trying to buy time to make unserious offers until Griner's trial is over. Griner is on trial for allegedly entering Russia in February with cannabis oil in her luggage, something she said she uses for pain relief and that she packed in her bags unintentionally. Whalen was convicted on espionage charges in 2020 and sentenced to 16 years in prison. The State Department has declared both of them wrongfully detained.
Well, there you go.
So
Donald Trump would have gotten those prisoners back without needing to give up anything because he did it multiple times before. But we also wouldn't be in this situation with Russia if Donald Trump was president right now either, because Nord Stream 2 wouldn't have been completed. Russians would have been scared shitless to invade Ukraine because Donald Trump was threatening to... I mean, he threatened to nuke Moscow on a phone call with Vladimir Putin.
If Donald Trump were president right now, we would have had numerous new oil leases. Yeah. And we'd be producing our own oil, and it'd probably be like $1 a gallon.
Yeah, I think what I can't figure out is this is a golden opportunity for the United States to become the world's leading energy exporter. We could export natural gas to Europe. We can export oil to the rest of the world. I think probably Saudi Arabia is the big monkey wrench in the gears here because they're the leading exporter of oil and they're a key ally for the United States in the Middle East. And so I think we're not taking that opportunity to supersede them because we can't afford for whatever reason to alienate them. So, but still, I don't know why we can't do natural gas because Saudi Arabia is all about oil and Europe needs natural gas. Yeah. So why aren't we becoming a leading exporter of natural gas and shipping that to Europe? Yes, it is.
Because it's not part of their climate
No,
change
that's what the Nord
BS.
Stream 2 pipeline was. It was a natural gas pipeline. And also, there's no carbon byproducts when you burn natural gas.
Well, are we positive that the Biden administration knows that there's natural gas here?
Oh, maybe not. Yeah.
Maybe they think that it's only oil and coal and that's dirty and gross and we're not going to do it?
Let me see. Was Nord Stream 2 an oil pipeline?
I thought it was oil.
No, I don't think so. But anyway, any other things to say about this one?
I just think it's ridiculous. That was pretty much the whole thing. I mean, the trades are not one for one as it is. And if they think that they're in any position to do any negotiating, they're out of their minds. And it's sad for the Americans that are detained there, sure, but also it's just another testament to the atrocious job that this administration is doing, because they can't even negotiate successfully the return of 2 American citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So don't expect them to do anything of value in the next 2 years.
Yeah. And Nord Stream 2 is a gas pipeline.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Well, that's all the stories we had.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. A little short and sweet
What
one
did you-
for you.
Oh, yeah.
This is our 25th episode. So you know what's funnier than 24?
25.
25.
SpongeBob classic.
Memes.
Cool. All right. Well,
Memes.
that's it. Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, that was Take Your Medicine, episode 25. I'm Jacob,
And I'm Sadie.
and we'll see you in the next one.
See ya.